When Farmer Joe walked into the most exclusive car dealership in town, wearing his trademark overalls and muddy boots, the salesmen couldn't hide their smirks. They whispered and pointed, certain he was lost or confused. After all, what would a simple farmer want with a Lamborghini? The head salesman even suggested he might be more comfortable at the used truck lot down the street. But there was something different about this farmer, something they couldn't see beneath those worn overalls and weathered hands. What these judgmental salesmen didn't know was that Joe was about to teach them the most expensive lesson of their careers. How did a small-town farmer end up with enough cash to buy their most expensive car right off the showroom floor? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Long before the sun thought about rising over Miller County, Joe Carter's boots were already crunching through the morning frost. At 62, he moved with the same purposeful stride he'd had since taking over the family farm 4 decades ago. The worn overalls that had drawn such disdain at the dealership were his second skin, their pockets containing a lifetime of soil samples and folded notes. "Morning, Mr. Carter." Miguel, his operations manager, called from near the hydroponic bay, systems showing some interesting readings from last night's cycle. Joe nodded, pulling a small tablet from his chest pocket, the only hint that this wasn't quite the traditional farm outsiders assumed it to be. The screen's soft blue glow illuminated his weathered face as he studied the overnight data. "Nutrient uptakes improved by 12%, he murmured, more to himself than Miguel. "Looks like those adjustments to the mineral balance are paying off." Behind them, the sun began painting the sky in watercolor strokes of pink and gold, revealing the true scope of Carter Farms. Where other local operations boasted endless rows of corn or soybeans, Joe's land told a different story. Gleaming greenhouse domes dotted the landscape like giant dewdrops, each one housing a vertical farming system that had taken years to perfect. Between them, traditional crop rows created a patchwork quilt of green and gold, a bridge between old ways and new. Sarah, his granddaughter and recent agricultural science graduate, emerged from the nearest dome. At 24, she represented everything Joe had worked for, the next generation of farming, armed with both respect for tradition and hunger for innovation. "Grandpa, you've got to see this." She waved a tablet of her own. "The new algae-based fertilizer formula is showing incredible results in Dome 3. We might be looking at yield increases of up to 30%. Joe smiled, remembering a time when such yields would have seemed like science fiction. He'd started small, experimenting with hydroponics in an old barn while neighboring farmers scoffed at his fancy water growing. Those same farmers had stopped laughing years ago, though they still didn't know the full extent of his success. The morning progressed with its familiar rhythm, checking systems, adjusting parameters, meeting with the research team he'd quietly assembled over the years. Each member had been handpicked not just for their expertise, but for their ability to keep secrets. As far as the outside world was concerned, Carter Farms was just a moderately successful family operation run by an old man in overalls. By mid-morning, Joe was in his office, a space that would have shocked the dealership. Salesman. Behind the barn's weathered exterior lay a state-of-the-art command center, walls lined with monitors displaying real-time data from every dome and field. Here, Joe could track everything from soil moisture levels to market futures, all while maintaining his carefully crafted image of rural simplicity. Dad, his son James, appeared in the doorway, fresh from his morning rounds. The patent lawyers called. They want to discuss the new vertical rotation system. Joe nodded, adding another item to his mental checklist. The patents were another piece of his hidden empire, dozens of them now, each one representing a breakthrough in agricultural technology. The royalties alone generated more income than most people would see in several lifetimes, but that wasn't why he did it. "Schedule it for Thursday," he replied, eyes still on the monitors. "And James, make sure Sarah sits in on this one. She needs to understand how we protect our innovations." As James left, Joe's gaze drifted to the old family photo on his desk, him and his late wife Martha, standing proud in front of their first greenhouse. She'd believed in his vision when nobody else did, mortgaging everything they had to fund his early experiments. The memory of her faith still drove him forward even now. The rest of the morning blurred past in a flurry of activity. Joe moved between the domes, checking on various projects, offering guidance where needed, always teaching. Every worker on his farm understood they were part of something bigger than traditional agriculture. They were pioneering the future of food production. By lunchtime, he was back in his overalls, sharing sandwiches with his crew in the old farmhouse kitchen. It was a tradition he'd never abandoned, no matter how successful the operation became. Here, conversation flowed freely, ideas were exchanged, and the true spirit of Carter Farms lived on. "Mr. Carter," one of the younger researchers ventured, "I heard about what happened at the dealership yesterday. Those guys had no right to treat you that way." Joe just smiled, brushing crumbs from his overalls. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the best lessons come from letting people underestimate you." Joe's mind drifted back to 1995 as he studied the latest patent application on his desk. Back then, Carter Farms had been drowning in debt, and the bank was breathing down his neck. That winter had been particularly harsh, destroying half his crops and nearly crushing his spirit along with them. He remembered the night that changed everything. Sitting at the kitchen table, watching Martha tend to her small indoor herb garden, something clicked. If plants could thrive in their kitchen window, why couldn't he scale that concept? While other farmers prayed for rain and fought against frost, he could create perfect growing conditions year-round. "You've got that look again," Martha had said, noticing his intense concentration. "What's brewing in that mind of yours?" He'd grabbed a napkin and started sketching. Vertical growing platforms, automated irrigation systems, climate-controlled environments. The idea seemed crazy, especially for a small-time farmer with more debts than dollars. But Martha didn't laugh. Instead, she'd pulled out their savings passbook and placed it next to his sketch. "Sometimes crazy is exactly what we need," she'd said. The first prototype was built in their barn, cobbled together from spare parts and determination. Joe spent countless nights studying hydroponics, learning about LED growth spectrums, and teaching himself computer programming to automate the systems. Local farmers dubbed him Computer Joe, not as a compliment. "Carter's lost his mind," they'd say at the coffee shop, playing with lights and computers while his real crops rot in the field. But Joe kept pushing forward. The first successful harvest from his vertical system produced lettuce of such quality that a high-end restaurant in the city offered to buy his entire crop. It wasn't much money, but it was proof his concept worked. The real breakthrough came 6 months later. Joe discovered that by adjusting the light spectrum and nutrient flow in precise ways, he could significantly accelerate growth cycles while improving crop quality. He documented everything meticulously, filling notebooks with data and observations. Martha insisted he patent the system. "This isn't just about us anymore," she'd argued. "This could change farming forever." The patent attorney they consulted was skeptical at first. But as Joe explained the technical details, the man's expression shifted from doubt to excitement. The first patent was approved in 1997. Within months, agricultural companies started calling. Joe turned down their buyout offers, choosing instead to license his technology while continuing to refine it. Each improvement led to new patents, and the licensing fees began to add up. But Joe didn't stop there. He poured his profits back into research, converting more of his land into his revolutionary growing system. Each dome became a laboratory, each failure a lesson, each success a step toward his vision of sustainable, efficient farming. "Remember what they called you," Martha would tease whenever they received another royalty check. Computer Joe doesn't sound so bad now, does it? She didn't live to see the full fruition of their dream, but her belief in him had laid the foundation for everything that followed. The small indoor herb garden that inspired it all still sat in the kitchen window, tended now by Sarah with the same care her grandmother had shown. Today, Carter Farms held over 30 patents, with more pending. The vertical farming system had evolved far beyond that first prototype, incorporating artificial intelligence, advanced materials, and breakthrough nutrient delivery methods. But Joe still kept that original napkin sketch, framed in his office. Beside Martha's picture, the latest patent application represented something special, a completely automated farming system that could operate in any climate, anywhere in the world. It was the culmination of decades of research, countless failures, and unwavering persistence. As Joe signed the application, he thought about the dealership and smiled. Those salesmen saw an old farmer in muddy boots. They couldn't see the patents, the innovations, or the revolution in agriculture he'd quietly engineered. But soon, they'd understand that success doesn't always wear a suit and tie. The memory of his first visit to Giuseppe's Luxury Motors was still fresh in Joe's mind. He'd driven there in his old pickup truck, parking between a gleaming Porsche and a pristine Mercedes. The contrast couldn't have been starker, his mud-splattered farm vehicle among the polished exotic cars. The dealership itself was a cathedral of luxury, all glass and chrome and polished marble. As Joe pushed open the heavy glass door, his work boots left faint traces on the immaculate floor. The security cameras swiveled to follow him, their red lights blinking like suspicious eyes. "Can I help you?" The receptionist's voice dripped with barely concealed disdain as she looked up from her desk, taking in his worn overalls and weathered appearance. "Just looking to speak with someone about your vehicles," Joe replied quietly, maintaining his dignity despite her tone. "Sir, this is a luxury car dealership. Our vehicles start at 6 figures. She emphasized the words as if explaining to a child. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at—" "Let me handle this, Angela," a smooth voice interrupted. Bradley Thompson, the head salesman, approached with the practiced smile of a predator. His Italian suit probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "I'm sure we can direct this gentleman to a more suitable establishment." Joe noticed how Thompson kept a careful distance, as if poverty might be contagious. Several other salesmen had gathered nearby, watching the scene unfold with barely concealed amusement. "I'm interested in the Lamborghini Aventador," Joe stated simply, pointing to the sleek vehicle that commanded center stage in the showroom. A burst of poorly suppressed laughter erupted from the gathered salesmen. Thompson's smile widened, taking on a cruel edge. "The Aventador? Well, this particular model is rather expensive." He drew out the last word. "We're talking about a vehicle that costs more than most farms in the county." "I'm aware of the price," Joe replied calmly. "Are you?" Thompson's voice turned condescending. "Because we're talking about nearly $500,000, not exactly tractor money, if you catch my meaning." More snickers from the audience. Joe noticed a younger salesman, looking uncomfortable with the situation but staying silent. "Perhaps," Thompson continued, clearly enjoying himself, "I could interest you in some photographs, something to hang in your barn, or better yet—" He pulled out a business card and scribbled on the back, "Here's the address of Bob's used trucks. They're much more aligned with your circumstances." Joe took the card without a word, tucking it into his overall pocket. He could feel their stares on his back as he walked out, could hear the laughter and jokes starting before the door had fully closed behind him. Back in his truck, Joe sat quietly for a moment. He pulled out the card Thompson had given him and studied it. Then he took out his phone. Not the latest model, but one that could access his banking app just fine. With a few taps, he pulled up his main account balance. The number on the screen would have wiped the smirks off their faces instantly. The Aventador's price tag was barely a rounding error in his total worth, but that wasn't the point. This wasn't about buying a car. It was about teaching a lesson in humility and respect. Joe started his truck, the familiar rumble of its engine oddly comforting after the sterile silence of the dealership. He'd return, but not today. When he came back, it would be with purpose and planning. Let them laugh for now. Let them underestimate the old farmer in the muddy boots. As he drove home, he thought about what Martha would say. He could almost hear her voice. Sometimes, Joe, the best revenge is letting people stumble over their own assumptions. The sun was setting as he pulled into his farm, the golden light catching on the dome greenhouses that had built his fortune. Inside each one, millions of dollars in technology quietly revolutionized agriculture while the world saw nothing but a modest family farm. Joe smiled, patting the business card in his pocket. Thompson and his crew would learn eventually. After. All the best lessons were the ones you never saw coming. Back in his office, Joe opened the leather-bound ledger he'd maintained since the farm's earliest days. Its pages told the story of transformation, from a struggling family farm to an agricultural technology powerhouse. He ran his finger down the neat columns of numbers, each entry representing a careful step in his master plan. The first major turning point had come when the Japanese agriculture minister visited in 2015. Word of Carter Farm's revolutionary vertical growing system had reached across the Pacific, catching the attention of a nation desperate for food security solutions. "Mr. Carter," the minister had said through his translator, studying the towering walls of produce in Dome 1, "what you've created here could solve our urban farming crisis." The licensing deal they signed that day had added 7 figures to Joe's bank account overnight, but more importantly, it had opened doors. Suddenly, delegations from around the world were finding their way to his modest farm in Miller County. Joe flipped forward a few pages in the ledger. 2017, the Saudi contract. A nation with endless oil wealth but limited agricultural capacity had practically begged to implement his systems. The deal included not just licensing fees, but ongoing consulting contracts and a percentage of yields. "Your systems are producing more food in 1 vertical acre than traditional farms generate in 50 horizontal acres," the Saudi agricultural minister had marveled. "And with 90% less water consumption." Each success bred more opportunities. Agricultural companies that had once dismissed his ideas now came calling with partnership proposals. Joe entertained their offers, but maintained controlling interest in his patents. He'd learned early on that true wealth came from ownership, not quick payouts. The research division expanded steadily. Joe hired the brightest minds he could find, always with one condition: they had to appreciate the value of discretion. His team developed breakthrough after breakthrough. Automated pollination systems, AI-driven climate control, specialized LED arrays that doubled photosynthetic efficiency. "Dad," James had asked one evening, reviewing the quarterly reports, "why don't we go public? We could raise billions." Joe had just shaken his head. "Going public means losing control, answering to shareholders who care more about quarterly profits than long-term innovation. Besides," he'd added with a slight smile, "I kind of enjoy being underestimated." The ledger's most recent pages showed the fruits of that philosophy. Licensing agreements with 12 countries, research partnerships with 3 major universities, patent royalties that generated more daily income than most people earned in a year, all while maintaining the appearance of a modest family farming operation. Sarah entered the office, carrying fresh soil analysis reports. "Grandpa, the new mineral supplementation protocol is showing amazing results. Crop nutrient density is up 40%. Joe nodded, proud of how his granddaughter had embraced both the technical and philosophical aspects of their work. She understood that their real product wasn't just food, it was innovation itself. "We'll patent that too," he said, making a note in the ledger. File it under subsidiary company Delta AG. No need to draw attention to Carter Farms. The strategy of using multiple subsidiary companies had been particularly effective. Each breakthrough was attributed to a different entity, making it difficult for outsiders to connect the dots back to a simple farmer in Miller County. Joe closed the ledger and stood, stretching. Through his office window, he could see workers tending to the traditional crop fields that surrounded his high-tech domes. Those fields served as both camouflage and reminder. Sometimes the best way to revolutionize an industry was to do it quietly, from the inside out. The dealership's dismissive treatment still lingered in his mind, but it was just another example of how appearances could deceive. Let them see the worn overalls and muddy boots. His ledger told the real story, one of vision, persistence, and the kind of success that couldn't be measured by outward appearances. The local diner hadn't changed much in 30 years. Joe sat in his usual booth, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug, while Mary, the longtime waitress, topped off his cup. His weekly breakfast ritual remained the same, even as his bank accounts grew exponentially. "Did you hear about old Thompson's boy at the car place?" Mary asked, coffee pot hovering. "Apparently, they sold some fancy sports car for $500,000 last month. Can you imagine? $500,000 for a car." Joe hid his smile behind the coffee mug. He'd seen the sale in the local paper, a red Ferrari to a tech entrepreneur from the city, the same model he'd considered before settling on the Lamborghini for his planned purchase. "Times sure are changing," he replied mildly, cutting into his $3 eggs. At the counter, local farmers discussed crop prices and weather patterns. Joe listened quietly, knowing his vertical farming systems had already solved most of their complaints about drought and frost. But he kept that knowledge to himself, just as he kept quiet about the 3 international patents he'd filed that morning before breakfast. His phone buzzed, a private notification from his Swiss bank. Another licensing payment had cleared, adding 7 figures to his offshore account. Joe glanced at the number briefly before returning the phone to his overall pocket, right next to his worn leather wallet containing nothing but a few $20 bills and a faded photo of Martha. "You still driving that old pickup, Joe?" Frank Miller called from the counter. "My boy's dealership got some nice used models in last week." "Old truck suits me fine," Joe answered, thinking of the fleet of Tesla vehicles he'd quietly purchased for his research team. They were registered to one of his subsidiary companies, of course, and parked discreetly inside the laboratory complex, hidden behind the traditional barn structure. The diner's bell chimed as Bradley Thompson himself walked in, probably heading to the dealership. He barely glanced at Joe, just as he had that day at Giuseppe's Luxury Motors. The head salesman's designer suit looked out of place among the flannel shirts and work boots of the breakfast crowd. Joe watched Thompson order his fancy cappuccino to go, remembering the folder sitting in his home office safe. Inside was everything he needed for his upcoming visit to the dealership. Bank statements showing liquid assets that would make Thompson's eyes pop, documentation of his various business holdings, and the certified check he'd had prepared. But the most valuable thing in that folder was patience. Joe had learned long ago that timing was everything, in farming and in life. He'd waited years for his agricultural innovations to bear fruit. He could wait a little longer to teach Thompson and his crew their lesson in humility. Mary returned with his check, $8.95 for eggs, toast, and coffee. Joe left his usual $5 tip, the same amount he'd been leaving for years, even though he could have bought the entire diner with what he earned in passive income each month. "See you next week, Joe," Mary called as he headed for the door, his boots leaving familiar scuff marks on the linoleum floor. Outside, he passed Thompson's BMW parked next to his mud-splattered pickup. The contrast would have made a perfect photograph. The flashy luxury car beside the humble farm truck, each telling a different story about success. Joe started his old pickup, the engine's rough, idle, familiar and comforting. Through the diner's window, He could see Thompson holding court at the counter, probably sharing another story about his latest luxury car sale. Let him have his moment, Joe thought. Sometimes the best victories were the ones nobody else knew about. As he drove back to the farm, Joe reflected on what Martha used to say about wealth. Real richness isn't about what you show, it's about what you grow. She'd meant it about crops at the time, but the wisdom applied to everything. Success, character, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing your own worth, regardless of what others might see. Behind the weathered barn doors of Carter Farms lay a secret that would have stunned the agricultural world. Joe stood in the control center, surrounded by wall-to-wall monitors displaying real-time data from his automated farming systems. This was his true office, not the modest desk where he met with local suppliers, but a state-of-the-art command center that would have looked more at home in Silicon Valley. The new AI system is online, Mr. Carter. Dr. Chen, his lead software engineer, announced. It's already optimizing growth patterns across all 17 domes. Joe watched as graphs and charts updated in real time, showing everything from nutrient density to photosynthetic efficiency. Each dome was a self-contained ecosystem, managed by artificial intelligence that could make micro-adjustments to temperature, humidity, and light spectrums thousands of times per second. "Show me Dome 7's latest results," Joe requested, adjusting his overalls as he leaned in to study the data. The screen shifted to display his newest innovation, a completely automated vertical farming system that combined robotics, AI, and his proprietary growing methods. Robotic arms moved with ballet-like precision between the growing towers, testing, pruning, and harvesting without human intervention. The system's achieving a 98% efficiency rating, Dr. Chen reported proudly. That's unprecedented. In agricultural automation, Joe nodded, remembering the early days when he'd sketched his first automation concepts on the back of a seed catalog. The local farmers had laughed when they caught wind of his robot farm ideas. Now, those same concepts were revolutionizing food production across the globe. Sarah burst into the control room, tablet in hand. "Grandpa! The quantum sensors just picked up something amazing in Dome 3. The quantum sensors were Joe's latest breakthrough. Technology that could monitor plant health at the molecular level, detecting problems before they became visible to the human eye. Another innovation that would revolutionize farming once. He decided to release it to the world. "Show me," Joe said, following his granddaughter to another bank of monitors. The data streaming across the screen would have been incomprehensible to most farmers. But to Joe, it was a symphony of information, each data point representing another step forward in his quiet revolution. "The plants are exhibiting enhanced photosynthesis rates we've never seen before," Sarah explained, her excitement palpable. "It's like they're evolving in response to our optimized conditions." James joined them, carrying prints of their latest patent applications. "Legal team says these new breakthroughs could be worth billions. The quantum sensing technology alone could transform everything from farming to medical diagnostics." Joe took the papers, studying the technical diagrams that represented decades of innovation. Each patent was carefully structured to protect their intellectual property while revealing only the surface of their true capabilities. "File them under Green Valley Technologies," he instructed. "Keep Carter Farms out of the paperwork." Their technological achievements were carefully distributed across a network of seemingly unrelated companies. To the outside world, each breakthrough appeared to come from a different source. Nobody suspected that a humble farmer in Miller County was the connecting thread. The control room hummed with activity as his team of scientists and engineers worked at their stations. Each had been personally selected by Joe, not just for their brilliance, but for their discretion. They understood that what happened in the domes stayed in the domes. "Dr. Chen," Joe called, "show me the global implementation map." A world map materialized on the main screen, dotted with points of light representing every facility using their technology. Clusters of brightness covered Japan, Saudi Arabia, and parts of Europe. Soon, new points would appear in Africa and South America, where pilot programs were under development. We're estimating that our systems will be producing 15% of the world's fresh produce within 5 years, Dr. Chen noted. All while using minimal water and zero pesticides, Joe allowed himself a moment of pride. His innovations weren't just making him wealthy, they were helping to solve global food security challenges. The fact that most people thought Carter Farms was just another small family operation only made the achievement sweeter. A notification flashed on one of the screens, another patent license payment, this one from a major European agricultural consortium. Joe glimpsed the amount before it disappeared into his encrypted banking network. It was more than the Lamborghini's price tag. "Keep monitoring the quantum sensor data," he instructed Sarah. "I want a full report by next week. And James, make sure those patent applications are airtight. We're not just protecting technology anymore, we're protecting the future of farming." As his team returned to their work, Joe straightened his overalls and prepared to head back outside. He had a meeting with a local seed supplier, one of the many ordinary interactions that maintained his carefully crafted image. Let Thompson and his dealership crew laugh at the old farmer in muddy boots. They had no idea they were mocking a man who was silently transforming global agriculture from a hidden room behind a barn door. The Miller County Gazette sat folded on the counter at Pete's hardware store, its headline announcing another local farm being sold to a corporate conglomerate. Pete Wilson, who'd run the store for 30 years, shook his head as he rang up Joe's. "Purchase just a few basic supplies and some electrical wire. Shame about the Anderson place," Pete said, bagging the items. "5th farm this year to sell out. Don't know how you managed to keep going, Joe. What with all these big companies moving in?" Joe pocketed his receipt, thinking about the irony. He owned more agricultural patents than most of those corporations combined. "Just lucky, I guess," he replied modestly. The bell above the door chimed as Susan Anderson walked in, eyes red from crying. Her family's farm had been the latest casualty of changing times. "Joe," she called out, "got a minute? Tom and I were wondering if you might be interested in some of our old equipment. Selling it cheap before the corporation moves in." Joe felt a pang of sympathy. He'd known the Andersons his whole life. "Stop by the farm later," he said. "We'll figure something out." What Susan didn't know was that Joe had already instructed his lawyers to create a way for the Andersons to lease back their land through one of his shell companies at rates they could actually afford. He'd done the same for 3 other local families, all while maintaining his image as a modest farmer who'd somehow managed to stay afloat. At the coffee shop next door, the morning crowd was deep in discussion about Carter Farms. Joe could hear them through the open door as he loaded his supplies into his truck. "Must be doing something right," Bill Jenkins was saying. "Those fancy greenhouses of his keep expanding. Heard he's even got computers running things now." "Computers can't grow crops," someone scoffed. "Carter's just got lucky with those specialty vegetables he sells to the city folks." If they only knew that those specialty vegetables were being grown using technology that had earned him multiple international awards, under different company names, of course. The local bank manager, David Mitchell, passed by, offering a friendly wave. Joe knew Mitchell was puzzled by his banking habits. The modest checking account he maintained locally showed nothing unusual, while the real financial activity happened through private banks in Switzerland and Singapore. "Morning, Joe," called Linda Thompson, Bradley's wife, as she hurried past with shopping bags from the boutique down the street. "Brad told me you were interested in one of those fancy cars. Quite ambitious for a farmer." Her tone carried the same condescension as her husband's, wrapped in small-town politeness. Joe just smiled and waved, remembering the automated alert he'd received that morning about another 8-figure licensing payment. Back in his truck, Joe glanced at the local paper. There was a small article about Carter Farms, praising its innovative approach to traditional farming. The reporter had interviewed him last week, and Joe had carefully maintained his image, talking about simple improvements and hard work, while the real innovations hummed away behind secured doors. He drove through town, passing the local high school where he'd anonymously funded a state-of-the-art agriculture and technology program. The students were out in the teaching garden, learning basic growing techniques. None of them knew that the basic vertical growing systems they used were simplified versions of his patented technology. At the stoplight, Joe found himself next to Bradley Thompson's BMW. The car salesman barely glanced his way, too busy talking on his Bluetooth headset about some upcoming luxury car sale. Joe's hand brushed against the certified check in his pocket, the one that would soon wipe that smug look off Thompson's face. The local radio station was playing its morning farm report, discussing commodity prices and weather forecasts. Joe smiled at their traditional concerns, knowing his climate-controlled domes made weather nearly irrelevant. His crops grew perfectly, year-round, while his AI systems traded futures contracts worth millions based on real-time global data. As he turned onto the road leading to his farm, Joe passed a tour bus full of Japanese agricultural students. They'd come to study traditional American farming methods, a cover story for their real purpose. Those students were actually here to learn about his latest technological breakthroughs, all while the town remained oblivious to the agricultural revolution happening in their midst. Just another day in small-town America, where the richest man in the county drove a beat-up truck and wore old overalls, and nobody had a clue. The video conference room hidden beneath Dome 5 hummed with anticipation. On the massive screen, executives from Global Agritech, one of the world's largest agricultural technology companies, waited in their Tokyo boardroom. Joe sat quietly in his chair, still in his work clothes, while his lawyers and technical team made last-minute preparations. "Mr. Carter," the CEO began, bowing slightly, "we've reviewed your quantum sensing technology. What you've achieved, it's beyond anything we've seen." James handed his father a folder containing the final contract terms. The numbers made the Lamborghini's price tag look like pocket change. $10 billion for exclusive Asian market rights, the CEO continued, with additional performance bonuses that could double that figure over 5 years. Joe studied the contract while appearing to listen. He'd actually memorized every detail during his late-night review sessions. The deal wasn't just about money. It was about changing global agriculture forever. "There is one condition," Joe said quietly, watching their reactions. "The technology stays branded under Green Valley Technologies. Carter Farms remains anonymous." The Japanese executives exchanged glances. They'd been pushing for the prestige of announcing their partnership with the brilliant innovator behind the technology. "Mr. Carter, forgive my directness, but why? Your achievements deserve recognition. You could be celebrated as one of the greatest agricultural innovators in history." Joe thought about the dealership, about Thompson's sneering face. "I prefer my privacy," he said simply. Sarah, monitoring the technical readouts nearby, caught her grandfather's eye and smiled. She understood. This wasn't about hiding. It was about choosing when and how to reveal their true power. The negotiations proceeded smoothly after that. Within 2 hours, documents were signed, funds were transferred, and history was made, though the world wouldn't know it yet. "Congratulations, Mr. Carter," his lead lawyer said after the video conference ended. "You're now officially one of the wealthiest individuals in the agricultural sector." Joe nodded, already thinking ahead. "Transfer the initial payment through our usual channels, split it between the Swiss and Singapore accounts." "And the Lamborghini fund?" James asked with a knowing smile. "Leave that separate. Some things you want to pay for in person." Later that evening, alone in his office, Joe reviewed his financial dashboard. The deal had pushed his net worth well into 11 figures. He could buy every luxury car dealership in the state without denting his bank account. But this wasn't about buying power. It was about something his father had taught him long ago: respect isn't bought, it's earned. And sometimes, earning respect meant waiting for the perfect moment to show people the error of their judgment. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Global Agritech stock had surged on the announcement of their acquisition of revolutionary agricultural technology from an unnamed source. Analysts were speculating wildly about the mysterious company behind the innovation. Joe closed the browser and pulled up the security feed from Giuseppe's Luxury Motors. Thompson was there, smugly showing a customer the same Lamborghini that had prompted such disdain when Joe inquired about it. "Soon," Joe murmured, thinking of the certified check in his safe. The dealership's cameras wouldn't just record his return visit, they would document a lesson in humility that Bradley Thompson would never forget. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Miguel, looking excited. "Mr. Carter, the quantum sensors just detected something incredible in Dome 7. You need to see this." Joe stood, straightening his overalls. The biggest deal of his life had just closed, but the work never stopped. There were still innovations to perfect, boundaries to push, and yes, lessons to teach. Tomorrow, he'd start implementing the global Agritech deal. But for now, there were crops to tend and discoveries to make. After all, that's what a simple farmer did, even one who could buy every Lamborghini in the state with a single check. Joe sat in his private study, surrounded by luxury car magazines and detailed pricing sheets. The Lamborghini Aventador's specifications were burned into his memory after weeks of research. He'd studied everything: engine displacement, horsepower, acceleration times, even the synthetic leather quality of its interior. "You're really going through with this, aren't you?" James asked, watching his father compare color swatches. "Verde Mantis," Joe said, tapping the bright green sample. "Their most expensive custom paint option adds another $40,000 to the price tag." He'd chosen everything to maximize the impact. The most expensive model, every possible upgrade, the priciest customization options. The final total would be nearly double the base price. The thought of Thompson's face when he saw the numbers almost made Joe smile. "I had the bank prepare it exactly as you asked," James said, placing a certified check on the desk. "Cash equivalent, just like you wanted. Though I still don't understand why you don't just wire the money." Joe picked up the check, feeling its weight. Some lessons need to be tangible. He'd practiced this moment in his mind countless times. The certified check was crucial. There was something different about holding physical proof of wealth, something a wire transfer couldn't match. Thompson needed to see, touch, and understand the reality of his mistake. Sarah appeared in the doorway, holding a tablet. "The new suits are here, Grandpa. Want to try them on?" Joe shook his head. "No suits. I'm wearing these." He patted his overalls. His granddaughter grinned, understanding perfectly. The overalls were part of the lesson, the same ones he'd worn during his first humiliating visit. He'd had them cleaned, but deliberately didn't repair the small tear on the knee or the worn spots on the pockets. "I ran the numbers again," Sarah said, showing him the tablet. "With the latest licensing payments, you could buy the entire dealership. And 10 times over." "Not the point," Joe replied, studying the Lamborghini's dashboard layout. He wanted to be familiar with every button, every feature. When the time came, he wouldn't appear as a nervous first-time buyer, but as someone who knew exactly what he wanted. He'd also researched Thompson himself. The salesman had been with Giuseppe's Luxury Motors for 15 years, consistently their top performer. His commission on this sale would be substantial, making the revelation of his mistake even more impactful. "The security cameras?" Joe asked. "All working perfectly," James confirmed. "Every angle covered, high-definition video, not a moment will be missed." Joe had insisted on verifying the dealership security system was fully functional. He wanted the cameras to capture everything: the recognition, the realization, the complete dismantling of Thompson's prejudices. In his wall safe, beside the certified check, Joe had placed copies of his patent documents, bank statements, and company ownership records. He didn't plan to show them, but having them nearby gave him satisfaction, physical proof of how wrong they'd been about the old farmer in muddy boots. "I spoke with Miguel," Sarah said. "The team will handle everything while you're at the dealership. Dome 3's quantum sensor readings can wait." Joe nodded, appreciating how his family and employees understood the importance of this moment. It wasn't about revenge. It was about teaching a lesson in respect that would ripple far beyond the dealership's walls. He picked up his old wallet, the one with the worn leather and faded family photo. It would provide the perfect contrast. When he pulled out the certified check, every detail mattered in this carefully choreographed moment of revelation. "You know," James mused, "Thompson's probably forgotten all about that first visit." "He'll remember," Joe said quietly. "Some things stick with you, even when you're the one doing the judging." The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows. Through the study windows. Tomorrow would be the day. Joe had chosen it carefully. A Tuesday, historically the dealership's slowest day. He wanted Thompson's full attention for what was about to unfold. His phone buzzed with another alert from his banking app. Another $1 million in licensing fees had cleared. Joe ignored it. Tomorrow wasn't about the money. It was about something his father had taught him long ago. True wealth isn't what you have, it's what you do with it. And sometimes what you do with it is teach a lesson that needs teaching. The morning sun glinted off Giuseppe's luxury motor's glass facade as Joe pulled into the parking lot in his mud-splattered pickup. Like last time, he parked between two pristine vehicles, a Porsche 911 and a Mercedes AMG. The contrast was even more striking today, exactly as he'd planned. Inside his overall pocket, the certified check felt like it carried physical weight. Joe patted it once, straightened his shoulders, and pushed open the dealership's heavy glass door. The same security cameras that had witnessed his humiliation swiveled to track his entrance. The receptionist, Angela, he remembered, did a double take. "Sir, I'm not sure if you remember, but is Mr. Thompson available?" Joe's voice was quiet but firm. Yes, but tell him Joe Carter is here about the Lamborghini Aventador, the one he suggested I get pictures of for my barn." Angela's perfectly manicured fingers hesitated over her phone. Through the showroom glass, Joe could see Thompson holding court with several other salesmen, probably sharing another story about his latest high-end sale. "Brad?" Angela's voice carried across the showroom. "There's a gentleman here to see you about the Aventador." Thompson turned, his practiced smile freezing slightly as recognition dawned. He straightened his Italian silk tie and strode over, that same predatory grin spreading across his face. Well, Thompson said, loud enough for his colleagues to hear. "Our farming friend returns, still interested in those photographs." The other salesmen began to gather, drawn by Thompson's theatrical tone. Joe noticed the young salesman, from his last visit, hanging back, looking uncomfortable. "Actually," Joe said, his voice still calm and measured, "I'm here to buy." A ripple of poorly suppressed laughter spread through the gathering crowd. Thompson's smile widened. "Buy the Aventador?" Thompson gestured grandly toward the gleaming green supercar that commanded the showroom's center stage. "Perhaps there's some confusion about the price. This particular model, with its custom Verde Mantis paint and full options package, is listed at $725,000, Joe interrupted, plus tax and fees, bringing the total to just under $800,000. Thompson's smile flickered slightly. "You've done your research, but surely you understand." "The carbon fiber interior adds $30,000, Joe continued. "The premium sound system is $12,000. Custom wheels, $25,000. Shall I continue?" The showroom had gone completely silent. Even the water feature in the corner seemed to be holding its breath. "Mr. Carter," Thompson said, his condescending tone now tinged with annoyance. "This is a prestigious dealership. We deal with serious buyers, not farmers in muddy boots," Joe finished for him. "Well, frankly, yes." Thompson gestured at Joe's overalls. "This vehicle is typically purchased by successful individuals who look the part." Joe reached into his pocket. "You know, Brad, may I call you Brad?" My father taught me something important about success. He said it's not about looking the part, it's about knowing your worth and choosing your moments. Is there a point to this? Thompson was losing patience, his celebrity salesman facade cracking. The point, Joe said, pulling out his worn leather wallet, is that sometimes the most expensive lessons come free. From behind his faded family photo, Joe withdrew the certified check. He held it for a moment, watching Thompson's face. Speaking of expensive lessons, Joe said, holding out the check, I believe this should cover the Aventador, unless the price has gone up since yesterday? Thompson's eyes locked onto the check. Joe could practically see the zeros registering. In the man's brain, could see the moment reality began to crack his worldview. This is... Thompson's voice trailed off as he stared at the amount. Certified funds, Joe finished. More than enough for your most expensive car. From someone you judged not worthy of your time. The young salesman, who had shown discomfort during Joe's first visit, stepped forward, a look of admiration replacing his previous embarrassment. Would you like to see the car, Mr. Carter? The young man offered. Joe smiled. Thank you, but first... He turned back to Thompson, whose face had gone pale. I believe you owe me a tour of its features. After all, you're the expert on dealing with successful individuals, aren't you? Thompson's hands trembled slightly as he held the certified check, examining it as if trying to find some flaw, some excuse to maintain his worldview. The showroom remained eerily quiet, every eye fixed on the unfolding scene. I'll need to verify this with the bank, Thompson managed, his usual smooth confidence nowhere in evidence. By all means, Joe replied calmly. I believe your manager has the direct line to First National's president. Thomas and I had breakfast this morning. The dealership manager, who had been watching from his office, suddenly appeared beside them. Brad, a word. His tone made it clear this wasn't a request. As Thompson followed his boss to the office, Joe could hear the urgent whispers begin among the remaining salespeople. Angela, the receptionist, was frantically typing at her computer, probably searching for information about the humble farmer who could casually produce an $800,000 check. The young salesman, his nameplate read David Mitchell, stepped forward again. While they're verifying the funds, would you like to see the car's features, Mr. Carter? Joe nodded, appreciating the young man's professional demeanor. As they walked toward the Aventador, David spoke quietly. I wanted to apologize for not speaking up during your last visit. The way they treated you, it wasn't right. Sometimes, Joe replied, running his hand along the car's sleek lines. Standing up to wrong takes more courage than we have in the moment. What matters is learning from it. Through the office's glass walls, Joe could see Thompson on the phone, his face growing increasingly pale. The manager was simultaneously on another line, his expression shifting from concern to shock to something approaching panic. The Verde Mantis paint is a custom order, David explained, professional despite the drama unfolding behind them. It's actually developed using a special process that involves nanopigments for enhanced depth and clarity, Joe finished. The technology's similar to some agricultural applications I'm familiar with. David's eyes widened slightly, but before he could respond, Thompson and the manager emerged from the office. Both men's demeanors had transformed completely. Mr. Carter, the manager began, I'm Richard Giuseppe. I want to personally apologize for any misunderstanding during your previous visit. We would be honored to handle your purchase today. Thompson stood slightly behind his boss, looking like a man watching his carefully constructed world crumble. Joe could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes, the lost commission from their first interaction, the realization of how badly he had misjudged the situation. Brad, Giuseppe continued, why don't you show Mr. Carter the paperwork? Actually, Joe said quietly, I'd prefer to work with David here. He seems to understand something about respect that doesn't require a bank balance to activate. The implications hung heavy in the air. Thompson's face flushed red, then pale again. Giuseppe nodded quickly, perhaps too eagerly. Of course. Of course. David, please take Mr. Carter to the private signing room. Brad, my office. As David gathered the purchase documents, Joe noticed Thompson lingering, clearly struggling with something internal. Finally, the salesman stepped forward. Mr. Carter, I owe you an apology. Joe studied him for a moment. No, Mr. Thompson, you don't owe me anything, but you owe yourself a long think about what you learned today. In the private signing room, David efficiently processed the paperwork while Joe examined each document carefully. Through the glass, he could see various salespeople still whispering, some frantically searching their phones, trying to understand who this farmer really was. Will you be driving it home today, Mr. Carter? David asked as Joe signed the final form. No, Joe replied, a small smile playing at his lips. I arranged for enclosed transport. Wouldn't want to get any mud on it after all. As if on cue, a pristine white transport truck with the logo of an exclusive auto shipping company pulled into the dealership lot. The timing was perfect. Joe had scheduled it precisely for this moment. Walking back through the showroom, Joe caught fragments of whispered conversations, looked him up. Dozens of patents, agricultural technology empire, worth billions. But the sweetest moment came as he passed Thompson's desk. There, forgotten in the chaos, lay a copy of that morning's financial news. The headline read, Green Valley Technologies signs historic $10 billion deal with global agritech. Joe smiled, knowing Thompson would eventually make the connection. Sometimes the best lessons were the ones that kept teaching long after the moment had passed. News travels fast in small towns, but the story of Joe Carter's Lamborghini purchase moved at supersonic speed. By the time he finished his morning coffee at the diner the next day, the whispers had already begun. Did you hear? Mary whispered, as she topped off his cup. Betty from the bank says Joe bought one of those foreign supercars, paid cash. Joe focused on his eggs, hiding his amusement as the diner's regular crowd tried to steal glances without being obvious. The morning gossip circuit was in full swing, with each retelling growing more elaborate than the last. I heard it was $1 million, one farmer whispered. My cousin's friend at the dealership said it was custom ordered, another added. But why would Joe Carter need a Lamborghini? Someone wondered aloud. The bell above the door chimed as Linda Thompson, Brad's wife, entered. She stopped short upon seeing Joe, her face flushing as she remembered her previous condescending comments. The diner fell silent, everyone pretending to be deeply interested in their meals. Good morning, Linda, Joe said quietly, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. How's Brad doing today? She mumbled something inaudible and hurried to the counter, ordering her coffee to go. Joe could see her hands shaking slightly as she paid. Pete from the hardware store burst in, waving a newspaper. Joe, you're in the business section. He spread the paper on the counter and heads craned to read the headline, Local Farmer Revealed as Agricultural Technology Pioneer. The article connected the dots between Carter Farms, Green Valley Technologies, and several other companies. Joe's carefully maintained privacy had finally cracked, though the paper only scratched the surface of his true empire. Those greenhouses, Bill Jenkins said, shaking his head. We all thought you were just growing fancy lettuce for city folks, but you were revolutionizing farming itself. Joe finished his coffee, leaving his usual $5 tip. Still growing. Lettuce, Bill. Just doing it a little differently. Outside, he could see people pointing at his old pickup truck, now parked next to the spot where his transported Lamborghini would soon arrive. The contrast would give them something new to talk about. His phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. Grandpa, you're trending on local social media. Farmer Joe and Lamborghini Farmer are going viral. At the bank, David Mitchell Sr., young David's father and the bank president, waited by the door. Joe, all these years, you've been banking with us but keeping the real money elsewhere, haven't you? Joe smiled. Nothing personal, David. Sometimes privacy is worth more than the highest interest rate. The local paper had already called 3 times, seeking interviews. National media would probably follow once they connected him to the global agritech deal. His careful anonymity was unraveling, but Joe found he didn't mind. The lesson had been taught. Walking down Main Street, he noticed people's reactions had already changed. The condescending smiles were gone, replaced by looks of respect and curiosity. But it was the children's reactions that pleased him most. They pointed at him excitedly, whispering about the farmer who'd revolutionized agriculture. "Mr. Carter," called Susan Anderson, running from her real estate office, "about the farm. Was it you who arranged—" Her voice trailed off as understanding dawned. Joe nodded slightly. "Sometimes neighbors help neighbors, Susan. That's what small towns are about." By afternoon, the local coffee shop had created a new drink special. The Carter, rich but humble. Joe couldn't help but chuckle at that one. His phone kept buzzing with notifications as more people discovered his patents, his companies, his innovations. But it was Thompson's text that caught his attention. "Mr. Carter, I truly understand the lesson now. Thank you for teaching it with more grace than I deserved." Joe smiled, pocketing his phone. The town would never see him quite the same way again, but that was all right. Sometimes the best way to maintain humility was to let others discover it in their own time. 1 month after Joe's purchase, Giuseppe's luxury motors had undergone a transformation that went far beyond its newly updated customer service manual. The physical changes were subtle: a new seating area where visitors could comfortably wait. Regardless of their attire, a coffee station open to everyone who walked in, and notably absent was the previous atmosphere of judgment that had once permeated the showroom. Bradley Thompson stood before the monthly sales meeting, a changed man. Gone was the predatory smile and condescending attitude. "Let me tell you about the most expensive mistake of my career," he began, gesturing to a photograph of Joe's Lamborghini that now hung prominently on the wall. The story of the farmer in overalls had become part of the dealership's lore, a teaching moment that Richard Giuseppe had turned into the cornerstone of their new training program. "We lost more than a commission that day," Thompson continued, his voice carrying genuine regret. "We lost our integrity, but thanks to Mr. Carter's grace, we gained something far more valuable: wisdom." David Mitchell, now promoted to senior sales consultant, added his perspective. "It's not just about avoiding prejudice. It's about understanding that success doesn't wear a uniform." The dealership's security footage of both visits, Joe's initial humiliation and his triumphant return, had become required viewing for new employees. Giuseppe had even commissioned a professional training video titled "The Carter Protocol: Looking Past Appearances." "Yesterday," Thompson shared, "a mechanic came in during his lunch break, coveralls stained with grease. Last month, I might have dismissed him. Instead, I gave him my full attention, showed him every car he was interested in. Turns out he owns 3 successful auto repair shops and bought 2 vehicles." The sales staff nodded, the lesson thoroughly learned. The dealership's sales had actually increased since implementing their new approach. But more importantly, its reputation had transformed. Joe's influence extended beyond the showroom. The local business association had invited him to speak about customer service and prejudice in retail. He declined, suggesting instead that Thompson share the story, a gesture of forgiveness that further drove home the lesson. "Mr. Carter visits sometimes," the young receptionist who replaced Angela shared. "He still wears his overalls, drives his pickup truck, but now everyone stands a little straighter, smiles a little warmer, not because of his money, but because of who he is." The dealership had also created a unique scholarship program, inspired by Joe's story. Each year they would provide internships to local students, teaching them about both the automotive industry and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. Thompson's office had changed too. Where photos of his luxury car sales once dominated, he now displayed a framed piece of wisdom. "Judge not by the cover, but by the character." Below it sat the business card he'd once mockingly given Joe, directing him to the used truck lot, a humble reminder of his greatest lesson. Richard Giuseppe had embraced the change wholeheartedly. That day didn't just change our sales approach, he explained to a business magazine. It changed our entire philosophy. We're not just selling cars anymore, we're learning to see people. The impact rippled through the luxury car industry in their region. Other dealerships, hearing the story, began examining their own practices. The Carter effect, as it became known, was teaching businesses everywhere that true success could arrive wearing overalls and muddy boots. One afternoon, Joe walked into the dealership for his car's first service. Thompson personally greeted him, not with the desperate fawning some might expect, but with genuine respect. "We're still learning from you, Mr. Carter," Thompson said quietly. "Every day." Joe smiled, noting how the other customers, regardless of their attire or appearance, were receiving the same respectful treatment he now did. Sometimes the most lasting changes came not from revenge, but from quiet dignity and the opportunity for others to learn from their mistakes. In the wake of his newfound public recognition, Joe Carter faced a choice: retreat back into privacy or use his visibility to make a difference. The answer came to him one morning while watching local high school students tour one of his greenhouse domes. "The Carter Foundation for Agricultural Innovation," he announced at a small gathering in the town hall. $100 million to start, focused on helping the next generation of farmers embrace technology while keeping their family. Farms. The room erupted in murmurs. Joe stood in his trademark overalls, Sarah and James beside him as he outlined his vision. This wasn't just about money. It was about preserving a way of life while revolutionizing it. "Every family farm that's struggling will have access to our technology," he explained. "Free licensing, training, and support. No strings attached." The Anderson family sat in the front row, tears in their eyes. Their farm, which they'd nearly lost, was now a pilot site for Joe's vertical farming systems. Their profits had tripled in just 3 months. "But that's just the beginning," Sarah added, stepping forward. "We're opening the Carter Institute for Agricultural Technology at the local community college. Full scholarships for farming families looking to modernize their operations." Joe watched the faces in the crowd. People who'd known him for decades, who'd dismissed his fancy farming ideas, who'd now become the first beneficiaries of his success. There was no satisfaction quite like seeing hope replace despair in a farmer's eyes. "The foundation will also be purchasing foreclosed farmland," James announced, "not to consolidate it, but to return it to family farming. With our technology and training, these farms can thrive again." Thompson, sitting quietly in the back, raised his hand. "Mr. Carter, Giuseppe's would like to contribute. Maybe a transportation program for farming families, free service for their vehicles." Joe nodded, appreciating how the car salesman had internalized the lesson about giving back. "We'd welcome that partnership, Brad." The foundation's first year would focus on Miller County, but the plan was to expand across the state, then nationally. Joe had already fielded calls from agricultural departments in 20 countries, all interested in his model of preserving family farms through technological innovation. "Martha always said wealth was like fertilizer," Joe told the gathering. "Spread it around and things grow. Pile it up in one place and it just makes a stink." The laughter was warm, genuine. These were his people, even if they now saw him differently. The foundation would be his way of ensuring that the values he and Martha had lived by wouldn't be lost in the glare of his success. Later that afternoon, Joe walked through one of his original greenhouse domes with a group of young farmers. Their questions were eager, technical, focused on learning rather than just copying his success. "Sir," one young woman asked, "why didn't you share all this technology sooner?" Joe paused by a vertical growing tower. "Sometimes innovations need time to mature, just like crops, but mostly I needed to be sure we could protect the small farmer. Big corporations would have taken this technology and used it to push family farms out of business. Now, we can help level the playing field. The foundation's offices, deliberately located in a converted barn, were already humming with activity. Grant applications were being processed, training programs developed, and hope was being cultivated as carefully as any crop in Joe's greenhouses. "Your grandmother would be proud," Sarah said softly, joining him by the vertical tower. "This is exactly what she meant about growing more than just crops." Joe nodded, watching the young farmers excitedly discuss new possibilities for their family lands. In their enthusiasm, he saw the future of farming, a perfect blend of tradition and innovation, just as he and Martha had dreamed. The letters started arriving a month after the foundation's launch, hundreds of them, from farmers across the country, each telling a similar story of struggle, hope, and inspiration. Joe sat in his office, reading each one personally. "Dear Mr. Carter," one began, "I was about to sell my family's farm to a corporation. Then I read about you in the Farming Journal. Now, thanks to your foundation's technology program, we're not just surviving, we're thriving. My kids will be able to continue our family's legacy." Sarah walked in with another stack of mail. "These aren't just thank you letters anymore, Grandpa. They're success stories." She was right. The foundation's first wave of grants had transformed dozens of local farms. The Anderson place, once on the brink of foreclosure, had become a showcase for agricultural innovation. Their vertical farming towers now produced more in a month than their old fields had yielded in a year. "Tom Anderson's daughter just got accepted to the Carter Institute," Sarah added. "She wants to study agricultural robotics." Joe smiled, remembering how the local farmers had once mocked his robot farm ideas. Now, their children were eagerly embracing the future of farming. The transformation wasn't limited to agriculture. Other successful business people, inspired by Joe's example, had started coming forward to help their communities. Bradley Thompson had launched a mentorship program at the dealership, teaching young salespeople about respect, judgment, and the true meaning of success. The Miller County Business Association wants to create an annual Carter Award for ethical business innovation, James reported, entering with the morning papers. "They say you've changed the way people think about success and responsibility." Local high school students had started an entrepreneurship club using Joe's story as their inspiration. They wore overalls to their meetings, not mockingly, but as a reminder that appearance and achievement weren't always linked. The young man who'd caught Joe's attention at the dealership, David Mitchell, had become one of the foundation's success stories himself. He'd combined his automotive experience with agricultural technology to develop better delivery systems for the vertical farming units. His first patent was pending. "You taught me two things," David had told Joe. "First, never judge a book by its cover. Second, success isn't about looking successful, it's about creating value for others." The ripple effects continued spreading. Other wealthy individuals in the region, previously focused on displaying their success, began shifting toward Joe's model of quiet achievement and community support. The local Mercedes dealership had started a scholarship program. The country club had opened its doors to community events. "Martha would love what's happening," Joe said quietly, looking at her photo on his desk. "The money's finally doing what she always said it should, helping things grow." A group of international agricultural students watched through the office window as Joe read their letters. They'd come to learn about his farming technology, but were learning far more about character and leadership. The latest agricultural journal lay open on Joe's desk, featuring an article about the Carter Revolution in farming. But it wasn't the technical innovations that the article focused on, it was the philosophy behind them. "Success grows best," the article quoted Joe, "when it's planted in humility and watered with purpose." Young farmers across the country had started wearing overalls to agricultural technology conferences, calling it the Carter look. The irony wasn't lost on Joe. The very image that had once drawn scorn was now a symbol of innovative thinking and unpretentious achievement. Even the Lamborghini, now quietly parked in his barn most days, had become part of the lesson. Joe occasionally drove it to schools and farming communities, not to show off, but to remind people that success and humility could coexist. "Your stories become bigger than you," Sarah observed, watching another school group arrive for a tour. "It's becoming a movement." Joe nodded, picking up another letter from his desk. This one was from a young farmer in Kansas who'd been inspired to develop his own agricultural innovations. The letter ended with a line that made Joe smile. "You showed us that true success isn't about the car you drive or the clothes you wear. It's about the difference you make while being true to yourself." 6 months after the Lamborghini purchase, Joe sat in his favorite chair on the farmhouse porch, watching the sunset paint his greenhouse domes in shades of gold. Sarah had arranged a family dinner to celebrate the foundation's latest milestone, their 100th farm saved from corporate takeover. The Lamborghini sat in the driveway, covered in a light film of dust. Joe hadn't driven it much. The old pickup still suited him better, but he kept it as a reminder, not of his triumph over Thompson's prejudice, but of the moment he'd realized what true victory meant. "Penny for your thoughts, Dad?" James settled into the chair beside him, handing him a cup of coffee. "Just thinking about what winning really means," Joe replied, sipping the coffee. "You know, when I walked into that dealership the second time, I thought it was about proving Thompson wrong." Through the screen door, they could hear Sarah's children laughing as they helped their grandmother set the table. The sound carried across the porch like music. "But it wasn't about that at all, was it?" James smiled, understanding in his eyes. "No," Joe shook his head. "The real victory happened long before that day. It happened every time we chose to stay true to ourselves, every time we put innovation above appearance, every time we remembered what your mother taught us about real worth." The screen door creaked as Sarah joined them, carrying a photo album. "Look what I found in the old storage room," she said, opening it to reveal pictures from the farm's early days. There was Joe and Martha, standing proud in front of their first greenhouse. Their clothes were worn, their smiles bright with hope. Another showed Joe working on his first vertical farming prototype, Martha bringing him coffee late at night. In every image, those same overalls, that same quiet determination. "Your grandmother used to say something about victories," Joe told Sarah's children as they crowded around to see the photos. "She said the sweetest victories aren't the ones you celebrate in public, but the ones you feel in your heart when you've stayed true to yourself." The evening air carried the scent of fresh-cut hay and Martha's old rose bushes. From this vantage point, Joe could see both the past and future of Carter Farms, the traditional fields where he'd learned to farm from his father, and the high-tech domes where his grandchildren were learning to farm for tomorrow. "You know what Thompson said to me last week?" James mentioned, turning a page in the album. "He said the day you bought that Lamborghini wasn't just about teaching him a lesson. It was about teaching all of us that success isn't what you own. It's who you are." Joe nodded, watching his grandchildren point excitedly at the old photos. They wore overalls too, not because they had to, but because to them those overalls represented something special, a legacy of innovation, integrity, and unwavering authenticity. The Foundation's office had sent over their latest report. Hundreds of farms saved, thousands of acres preserved for family farming, and countless young people inspired to combine tradition with innovation. But the numbers didn't tell the real story. The real victory was in the small moments, the father and daughter working together in a vertical farming dome, the family farm passing to another generation instead of becoming corporate property, the young inventor wearing overalls while programming agricultural robots. "Time for dinner?" Sarah's voice called them inside, where the big farmhouse table was set with Martha's old china. 3 generations of Carters gathered around, joined by some of the Foundation's scholarship students. As Joe looked around the table, he saw his true victory, Not in the Lamborghini collecting dust outside, not in the patents or bank accounts or global recognition, but in the continuation of values that money couldn't buy and success couldn't change. "Martha," he whispered to himself as he bowed his head for grace, "we didn't just grow crops, we grew something far more valuable." The real victory, he realized, wasn't in proving anyone wrong. It was in proving Martha right, about staying. True to yourself, about helping others grow, about measuring success, not by what you have, but by what you leave behind. 5 years after Joe Carter walked into Giuseppe's luxury motors in his muddy boots, Miller County had transformed. The bronze statue in the town square wasn't Joe's idea. The community had commissioned it themselves. It showed him in his trademark overalls, holding a tablet in one hand and a handful of soil in the other, perfectly capturing the bridge between tradition and innovation he'd come to represent. The inscription was Thompson's suggestion, Sarah told visitors who asked about the statue. "Success grows best in the soil of humility," words that had become the motto of both the Carter Foundation and the town itself. The Lamborghini still sat in Joe's barn, though it now shared space with a high-tech agricultural drone testing facility. Local children on school tours would whisper excitedly when they saw it, but not because of its price tag. To them, it represented something more important, the idea that appearances and assumptions could be proven wrong. Giuseppe's Luxury Motors had become known as the dealership that changed the industry. Their Carter Protocol training program had been adopted by luxury car dealers nationwide. Thompson himself had become a sought-after speaker on business, ethics, and customer service. "The day I handed Joe that used truck lot card was the most expensive mistake of my career," Thompson often said in his talks. "Not because of the lost commission, but because I almost missed the chance to learn what real success looks like." The Carter Institute for Agricultural Technology had graduated its first class of students. Among them was Susan Anderson's daughter, who developed a breakthrough in hydroponic nutrition that was already changing urban farming. She wore overalls to accept her diploma. Joe's innovations had spread globally, but his impact on Miller County remained his proudest achievement. Family farms that had been on the brink of extinction were now thriving centers of agricultural technology. The children of farmers who'd once mocked his crazy ideas were now pioneering innovations of their own. The diner where Joe still ate. Breakfast each morning had added a specialty coffee bar and farm-to-table menu, but Mary still served him the same simple eggs and coffee. His $5 tip hadn't changed either, though he'd quietly set up college funds for Mary's grandchildren. "You know what the best part is?" Joe asked Sarah one morning, watching the sunrise paint his greenhouse domes. "Nobody calls them crazy ideas anymore." The old pickup truck had finally been retired to a place of honor in the Carter Institute's museum, replaced by a new electric truck, though Joe had insisted on keeping it in the same modest style. Some habits didn't need changing. David Mitchell, the young salesman who'd shown him respect that day at the dealership, had become the foundation's director of innovation. His automotive-inspired improvements to the vertical farming systems were revolutionizing urban agriculture. Martha's rose garden had been preserved, now surrounded by a mix of traditional flowers and high-tech vertical growing columns. Like everything else about Carter Farms, it represented the perfect blend of old and new, of respect for tradition and embrace of innovation. On warm evenings, Joe still sat in his porch chair, wearing the same kind of overalls he'd worn all his life. But now he watched self-driving tractors tend the fields, while agricultural drones monitored crop health, all controlled by systems he'd helped develop. The letters still came, not just from farmers, but from people in all walks of life who'd been inspired by his story. Each one spoke of learning to value substance over appearance, of finding the courage to stay true to themselves while embracing change. "Grandpa," his youngest granddaughter asked one day, "why do you still wear overalls when you could buy any clothes you want?" Joe smiled, lifting her onto his lap. "Because, sweetheart, These overalls tell our family's story. They remind us that it's not what you wear that matters. It's what you grow, what you build, and how you help others grow too. As the sun set on another day at Carter Farms, Joe thought about legacy. The Lamborghini, the patents, the foundation, they were all part of it. But the real legacy was in the values that would outlive him. Humility, innovation, and the understanding that true success isn't about proving others wrong, but about proving to yourself that you stayed right. The security cameras at Giuseppe's Luxury Motors still had the footage of both his visits. They showed it at every new employee orientation, not as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder that sometimes the greatest lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. Even a farmer in muddy boots who taught the world that success grows best when rooted in who you really are.